And good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Equal Hope segment on CAN TV. I'm happy that you could join us. My name is Dana Wint. I am the Community Engagement Specialist for Equal Hope. Equal Hope is a nonprofit organization right here in Chicago that can assist you with a free mammogram, cervical screening, or help you get into a medical home free. My favorite four-letter word. They can help you with HPV, COVID, and flu vaccines, get you into a medical home. Listen, give them a call if you need their support, 312-942-3368, or you can visit equalhope.org to learn more about them. If you're a cancer patient, if you're a caregiver or provider, they have resources right there at equalhope.org that can assist you, and lots of information right at your disposal. Please visit equalhope.org today. Plus, they have a Latina navigation team that can assist you. So we're bilingual. We've cut out all the excuses, and early detection saves lives. I want to introduce you to this month's guest, Dr. Anton Lewis. He's the Associate Accounting Professor in the College of Business at Governor State University, where I actually got my master's degree. So it's actually my alma mater as well. We're talking today about the lack of black accountants in the whole United States and this reduction in DEI in business, in the business world. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. Lewis. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the field.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, first and foremost, so thank you very much. I got into the field back many moons ago when I lived in Britain, England. I'm English. And
Who would have known?
And when I finished my accounting degree, I went and I worked as an accountant, and I found myself to be one of the very few in the building black accountants. And I always wanted to know why this was the case. Speed up a number of years, and then I found myself in the United States teaching US soon-to-be accountants the pleasures of debits, credits, and all these sorts of things. And I also find out that in terms of African American representation, it's also really quite small. So my question has always been, why is this the case? Why do we have so few accountants in both the United Kingdom and the United States?
And what are you finding?
I'm finding that it's pretty bad. The last bit of data that we can get that's really conclusive, because there isn't as much data as there should be about this, was the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the AICPA. Their 2019 trend report basically said in the United States at that time there were about 2% who were African American that were qualified certified public accountants. And when they went on to look at the number of black partners who were qualified certified public accountants, they were about 2%. And to give you an idea of how much that is actually progress, there's an academic called Teresa Hammond, and I think she works in the San Francisco State University, and she wrote a seminal book around this area, the white collar professional. And in 2012, she brought out this book, and she had information. She did some research in this area that said in the mid-90s, representation of black CPAs was less than 1%. So we've never had a particularly good kind of representation of African Americans within the field. And in Britain, we just don't measure enough of the data for me to give you conclusive results.
So, I mean, how do the educational and professional institutions and the pipelines, how do they play into this lack of black talent in the profession?
Well, first and foremost, I must kind of foreground this with the simple fact that we're in an accounting crisis. Very shortly, everybody out there is going to experience a lack of accountants to be able to do their taxes. The field's in crisis point. On top of this, we've always had terrible black and brown representation from groups within this country. How they kind of contribute to this, quite simply, there isn't enough, I think, recognition of the fact that there are cultural nuances that really should be looked at, and cultural nuances that should really be supported. It's not
cultural nuances.
To give you an example, there's quite a bit of research, some that I've done and others out there, that might say when a black professional goes into the workplace, almost any workplace, there is a pressure to look your best, to look a certain way, to look really professional in terms of how one approaches the work that you do. So turning up in a dashiki, probably not a great idea. Turning up with a large afro also can denote that people think that you're less professional than you should really be. That's what I mean. There is less cultural acceptance. Instead, professionalism tends to mean an aspect of white professionalism. And that gives you an idea of how, I think particularly for those black and brown professionals, they can often find the professional workplace to be really quite inflexible in terms of cultural needs. And we certainly find this in some of the research that I've done and other kind of critical accounting academics.
Okay, so who is going to help foster a more inclusive workplace environment? Culture?
Well, I hope it's going to be bodies like I've just described, like the AICPA. I certainly hope it's going to be universities that are the beginning of the pipeline for accountants going forward. I certainly hope that the likes of the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, really get behind this. Lots of national bodies and the federal government, because it's really quite important. And they need to do things like begin to look to get into historically black colleges and universities and make sure those pipelines are correct going into large firms. They need to talk to the big four accountancy firms that are out there that tend to do lots of the national and international accounting. They need to make sure that they can find and be welcoming to diverse accountants of colour.
Talent. Okay, so I use an accountant, and I've always started out with an accountant when I started my first business. So I'm used to an accountant, a black accountant. I've always had. So, where are black people getting their taxes done then?
Well, I mean, that's the question. We certainly need research about this, because I'm not so sure. I mean, we've got a crisis of all accountants, and for those limited black accountants out there, there may be a good chance that many of them out there are doing lots of corporate work, corporate tax work, international stuff, etc., etc. Are they in our black communities? Are they serving our black business people, our black businesses? Probably not. And one of the other things that I found as I've investigated what it means to have a lack of representation of accountancy in one's communities, when we think of our black businesses, they're not supported by those who know the community and how the community responds to business well. So if you don't have as many black accountants, you don't have as many black bankers, you don't have as many black financiers, you don't have as many black business angels looking to invest in business, what you find is a constrained kind of occurrence around black businesses. We see this in the United Kingdom. I think certainly we see this in the United States. And just before we came on, I just wanted to check a figure. And I think we're down to one black bank in Chicago.
Which
and
is,
we used to have more.
Can we say? I don't know, maybe.
I think that's true. I think we're down to about one. And I have to double check the name.
Okay, so the accounting classes are being offered in schools.
Yes.
We are just not taking the classes.
It's not, but yes, but it's a little bit more difficult than that. All students are not taking the classes. So it's not just our Latina proto accountants. It's not just our African American accountants. It's also our dominant majority white potential accountants. All of these students are not taking the classes, and of those students who do take the classes, less and less of them are black and brown.
And the unpopularity of being the accountant is because,
well, when we think of medics, we have Grey's Anatomy. You know, when we think of...
I've never really watched the show, so that's not influencing me. So, okay.
I'm with you on that. I can't say I'm a massive fan myself. I've watched the odd episode late at night, but...
It's centered around accounting?
No,
it's centered around medicine.
It's medicine, right? But equally as well, you've got lots of shows about the law, yeah?
Right.
When was
Law
the last,
and Order.
Law and Order and that sort of thing. When was the last time that you saw a show centred around accountants, right? There's been maybe one movie in the last few years by Ben Affleck, The Accountant. And he was one of the most current representations we've had about what it's like to be an accountant. And he was an accountant for some very unsavoury people, let's just say. And he had lots of training on how to use bazookas and things like that. This is not representation of what we do in accounting. And I say this to point out the fact that it's not seen as being particularly exciting and not really very interesting. And I think that's one of the issues around our low numbers anyway. And I think particularly, if we were to speak to young black and brown students about what they really wanted to do, I'm almost certain being a doctor or being a lawyer is way up there as opposed to being an accountant.
Okay. So the stigma that it's not an exciting career, it seems like that would be balanced by the fact that it's a lucrative career.
Well, and again, it is, but not until you get qualified and go through all the stages. So, for example, I've heard of wages for starter accountants at some big four accountancy firms, think PwC, KPMG, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, EY, can be as low as $55,000. In the city of Chicago, starting, to be clear about that, and that's not really enough. I have heard, and some of my students have gone on to work for big financing outfits like Goldman Sachs, and their starting salaries, for example, have been known to be somewhere around $125,000. And you can begin to see, if you're not going to pay lots of young students who are already apprehensive about going into the profession, they probably would want to go to Goldman Sachs, or they might potentially want to go to Google, where they also pay in the tech industry. So the profession itself has a number of issues, just in general recruitment of any and all potential accountants, but it has acute issues around African American recruitment into the profession, and it is deeply needed. And unfortunately, we're also in a situation right now where we're seeing the last thing we need in the accounting field. We're seeing a retrenchment of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're seeing a pullback against all of this, and that does not help the situation.
Let's talk about that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's pretty much on the ballot as far as I'm concerned. What initiatives in the pullback of the DEI have absolutely positively affected this conversation?
I wrote an article in the CPA Journal, it's like a trade magazine, not too long ago, where I interviewed a colleague of mine who used to be the president of the National Association of Black Accountants, Jeanne Etienne. I don't think she'd mind me saying that. And she is exemplar of what I would call black woman professional brilliance, okay? And she, in the article, in the interview that I had, highlighted the difficulties of being a black woman professional in the accounting realm. And what we've seen here, and I mention Jeanne particularly because she was representative of this pushback. We've seen attacks against former presidents of Harvard University, which were black women. We've seen black women academics, for example, be accused of lots of plagiarism. We've seen a definitive attack on black professional femininity, and it makes it harder for black women to succeed in the professional environment, which is inherently unfair. And with if we have firms that are going to back up these policies, who will actually defend our black women professionals or African American women professionals, they know essentially that the firm has their back. They know that they can stay. They don't have the stress and the worry of being targeted and then removed. And nobody wants to experience that when they go into work, right? We want to feel that the company has your back. You want to feel that the company wants to be what it says, which is meritocratic. If you work hard enough, you'll be promoted. But without DEI policies there to hold firms accountable to the things that they say, they're not going to get done, and they aren't. And we're beginning to, it's quite interesting, we're beginning to see, a lot of this stems back from a ruling of the Supreme Court against Harvard about using affirmative action policies to earmark numbers of places and spaces for potential students of colour coming in. They ruled against it. And there are some numbers coming out, I think, of Harvard and some other places, I think MIT as well, that have pulled back on DEI and affirmative action stuff that is showing that their numbers are beginning to precipitously fall. We're seeing less black students in our colleges. And when the DEI policy gets removed from our firms, we're simply going to see less black professionals. This is, in my view, calamitous, something we really need to push back on. And certainly as an academic in the field, what gets me up in the morning is to try to work out, how can we change this? How can we show people that this just isn't the right thing to do?
Well, that's interesting. You say show people. So how would you say that this reduction in DEI initiatives has impacted employee morale or the culture in the companies, as far as showing you what?
Well, there's an interesting term that we use in the kind of critical accounting space, and that's part of the space that I work in. We talk of microaggressions, right? This idea that you have these small slights, suspected slights, which in of themselves every day aren't terrible. Maybe it's somebody commenting about your hair being slightly woolly, or somebody making a comment about having
What are you eating?
What are you eating? You've managed to get a suntan, right? On their own, not a problem. But you have that every day, every week, every month, 365 days of the week. It begins to wear on you. There's science behind it that says it can affect you psychologically. It's very stressful. When you don't see as many black people in the work environment, it can be what we call an environmental microaggression. Nobody has said that you don't belong. No one has said that this isn't for you. But the very fact, I've experienced this myself in my own past life as an accountant in Britain. It basically says, you don't belong here. We think things would be better if maybe you weren't there. And the proof's in the pudding, as we say, where I'm from. And that term really means, if you really cared about black and brown people in your organisation, you would simply have more of them in it. And so being a token, inverted commas, right, means that you feel the pressure of performance daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, in a way that some of your dominant majority white colleagues don't ever think about.
So, I understand, absolutely. As a professional black woman, I have definitely been there myself. But the issue, a part of the problem is helping this white person understand that there is a difference, that you all are not judging us the same, and that you have different levels of expectations for me versus my colleagues. So then the question is, is there a long-term effect on businesses when they don't have DEI initiatives?
Well, so this is an interesting point, right? So for many, many years, many large businesses, think Caterpillar, think Lowe's and John Deere, and I'm mentioning them specifically because I've just read that they've just...
You can only imagine who they're selling their products to. Okay.
Exactly, and they've reduced back on DEI policies. For many, many years, they have argued for the business case of diversity. They have said that diversity is not just a good thing to have, it's an actual function of business. More diverse companies make more money. More diverse companies, particularly with large companies with international markets, have employees
that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, that are able to go to different markets and be able to promote the company better because they're not all homogeneous. They're not all the same. They bring lots of skills. They bring experience. All these things make a company more agile in an ever more competitive workplace. Mm-hmm. However, it would seem to be a contradiction, because these same firms are saying now the business case for diversity no longer suddenly works. We don't do that anymore. So what happened to these benefits? Did they just evaporate? Nobody is really doubling down on exactly what has happened to that rhetoric, what has happened to that thinking. So is it that we're kind of reducing DEI, and as you say, essentially it's coming at a cost?
Right. For the business, you would think that if I was concerned about my bottom line, I'd be concerned, but then something else is driving the behavior.
Well, politics, perhaps. And there is a lot of the pressure to reduce DEI policy by companies has really come from suits by Republican PACs who want to make sure that this idea of meritocracy and fairness, as they define it, is applied. And they essentially say that any policy out there to help those who've been disenfranchised in the past is, frankly, penalises dominant majority white colleagues unfairly. And they've really pushed this, and a lot of firms have simply got frightened and reduced their DEI policies or got rid of them entirely, to the detriment of those black and brown colleagues, other colleagues of colour that are in their organisations.
So what can companies do to ensure that their DEI efforts are not entirely abandoned because of financial difficulties? That's going to be the reason.
I think they have to be brave. There is a simple question. I've said, you have the business case for diversity, and the problem with the business case for diversity was always, well, what happens if it's actually in the company's interest to not be diverse, right? I've argued social justice. I've argued it's the right thing to do. And doing the right thing, as all of us know, from a personal level, is always harsh. It's always hard. It's always costly. But ultimately, one is benefited from doing so. And I think companies need to be brave, and many actually are being brave. There are some figures out there that have said a number of companies, even in this environment, have begun to double down on their DEI and actually resisted threats of being sued by a number of these Republican PACs. And it's that's what I call for. And if you are a person of colour working within an organisation that's willing to fight for those rights, they're fighting for you. And that's an organisation I would like to work for.
Okay, so an aspiring black accountant who's facing barriers to entering the profession, what advice would you have for them? I
would say immediately talk to your potential accounting professor, or contact Big Four or mid-tier firms, because right now this is the best time to want to be a black or brown accountant, because they're running out. They don't have the choice. They need warm bodies in those seats to train, right? And so if you've thought about accounting, my suggestion would be contact a university of your choice, contact the accounting faculty there and begin to talk about your options. There of a number of recruiters in large firms and mid-tiers that I've spoken to, they are quite desperate to get black and brown accountants in there. Okay, they work very closely with organisations like the National Association of Black Accountants. They are at historically black colleges and universities trying to increase this pipeline. And so the question is, if you're interested, go there, ask, see what opportunities are rising, and sooner or later they're also going to have to pay more because they're running out of accountants. So I think this is a great time to be a black accountant, but we've got to step up and ask, how do we get into the profession?
All right, bada bing, bada boom, mic drop. This is a good time to be an accountant. Handle your money, know how to handle your money, how to handle your family's money, how to invest your money. It's a great profession. Hey, boring, so what? It pays. I want to thank Dr. Anton Lewis for stopping by and joining us. And you got to come back because you have a plethora of information it seems like we need. I want to thank you for watching and reminding you that if you need a free mammogram cervical screening or you need to get into a medical home, Equal Hope can help you. All you need to do is give them a call, 312-942-3368, or visit equalhope.org. We'll be back next month, September 24th, right before my birthday, talking about cervical cancer with Lori Wilcox. I want to thanks for watching you, watching me, and me watching you, and you watching them. And thank you. Pleasure. And good night. Have a great evening.